Hey folks, Rigor here. I just wanted to warn you in advance that this episode of Then Is Now's 13 Days of Hallowtober 2022 is perhaps one of the most controversial and polarizing ones we've had. Not since episode 11, in which my guest co-hosts had strong opinions about the film The Shining that went against what many horror fans think, have we had an episode that might seriously divide people. My guests on today's show are Scott S.A. Bradley and Michael, and we tackle the awesome vampire flick John Carpenter's Vampires from 1998, starring the always cool James Woods. However, two things happened. Scott brought to the table some extreme and controversial opinions about the film, and I was blindsided, so I wasn't fully prepared to truly discuss any of his points. As you'll hear, it's mostly him giving his opinion of the movie's supposed subtext. Scott Bradley's opinions are his own and do not necessarily reflect that of Then Is Now podcast. And second, Michael was unfamiliar with the movie and watched one of the sequels by accident. He did sit with us, though, and listen to what Scott had to say. After we recorded, Michael went and watched the film for himself and had several counterpoints to Scott's opinions. He came back and we recorded his take on the movie, and that will play after our discussion with Scott. Michael's opinions are also his own and do not necessarily reflect that of Then Is Now podcast. We'd love to hear your opinions about John Carpenter's Vampires and whether or not you agree with Scott or Michael or have a completely different take on the film. We are not a political show, and we do not take sides one way or the other. If you email us a polite letter giving us your thoughts, we'll read them on the air. Please send your feedback to thenisnow42@gmail.com. Thank you, and enjoy the show.
This is Paul T. Taylor, and you're listening to the Then Is Now podcast, you lucky so-and-sos.
Warning, warning!
Today's episode contains spoilers. So if you have not seen the movie or TV show that we are talking about, we highly recommend that you watch it first, then listen to this episode. Thank you.
Rise and shine, my sinners. When Father Evil starts his day, he gets a little deadly. Deadly Grounds coffee has the richest, smoothest flavor you'll find anywhere. It's sinfully delicious. Once you go deadly, you never go back. Order yours at getdeadly.com. Coffee's so good, it's scary.
Welcome to 13 Days of Hallowtober.
Hello and welcome to Then Is Now podcast's yearly 13 Days of Hallowtober event. I am your host, Rigor. Joining me today is new frequent guest co-host, Michael. What's happening, Michael?
Hey, how's it going?
Good,
Ready
good.
to talk some more horror.
Awesome. Glad to have you here. And also joining us today, once again, is author and podcaster, S.A. Bradley. What's new, Scott?
Hi, thanks for having me again. Looking forward to talking a little bit more horror. I never get a chance to do that. So.
Yeah. Excellent. We are continuing our yearly event called 13 Days of Hallowtober. Our theme this year is vampire movies. Today we're going to discuss the film John Carpenter's Vampires, a.k.a. just simply Vampires. So grab your snacks and drinks and get ready for a discussion about a fun vampire flick. Class is in session.
Have you ever seen a vampire? Forget whatever you've seen in the movies. It's not like they're seducing everybody in sight with cheesy Eurotrash accents, all right? They don't turn into bats. Crosses don't work. If you want to kill one, you drive a wooden stake right through his heart. We think we got a nest inside this place. And chances are we'll find a master in here somewhere.
I know your parents were bitten by vampires and you were raised by the church to be its master slayer.
No one knows vampires better than he does.
Open wide, baby.
But he met his match when he met the master who started it all, Jack Crow.
He was a priest. It's the first known case of vampirism.
First and most powerful. You are the only one who faced Valak and survived.
The master vampire has a telepathic link with his victims. You're gonna help us find him.
It's a cross.
For 600 years, Valak has wanted to live in the daylight. A master vampire, able to walk in the sun, unstoppable.
Biggest net that blood drinking mud of the world has ever known. Time to kill some vampires.
James Woods. From the master of terror comes a new breed of evil. John Carpenter's vampires.
You never told me they could do that. I didn't know they could do that.
Jack Crow leads his team of Vatican-sponsored vampire hunters in a daylight raid on an abandoned house in New Mexico. Finding a nest of vampires, the team subdue the creatures with gunfire, pikes, and wooden stakes, using a modified crossbow attached to a mechanical winch to pull them outside, where they are incinerated by sunlight. Despite disposing of 9 goons, Jack is concerned about not having found their older, more powerful master. While the team drunkenly celebrates with prostitutes at a local motel, the master vampire Valak arrives and bites one of the prostitutes, Katrina, initiating her transformation into a vampire. He swiftly murders the hunters, with only Crow and his trusted lieutenant Tony Montoya escaping alive with Katrina. Disturbed that Valak recognized him by name, Crow orders Montoya to lay low with Katrina, hoping to use her growing psychic link with Valak to track him down. After burying his team and burning down the motel, Crow reports to Superior Cardinal Alba, who confirms that Valak was a disgraced priest who led a rebellion against the church, leading to his execution and transformation into the first vampire. Valak has already killed another group of slayers in Germany, and Alba instructs Crow to form a new team, accompanied by archivist Father Adam Guiteau. Is it Guiteau or Guiteau? Adam
Guiteau, I believe.
Guiteau. Suspecting that his team was betrayed, Crow interrogates Guiteau and dispels his heroic notions of vampire hunting, showing him a map of vampire activity that indicates the vampires are searching the southwest for an unknown object. Guarding Katrina at a hotel, Montoya explains the changes she's experiencing. Horrified, she attempts suicide and bites Montoya when he rescues her, which he hides from Crow and Guiteau when they arrive. Crow decides to pursue Valak without gathering a new team, and Katrina is linked with Valak when he questions and kills a priest. Sensing Guiteau is hiding something, Crow threatens him, recounting that he killed his own father for being bitten by a vampire and killing Jack's mother in front of him. Guiteau reveals that Valak is seeking an ancient relic called the Black Cross of Berziers, and Crow welcomes him to the team as his new slayer. Using Katrina's psychic link, Jack, Montoya, and Guiteau learn that Valak has roused 7 additional masters. They follow the vampires to a Spanish mission where Valak has slaughtered the monks and seized the cross. Guiteau realizes that Valak plans to complete his own exorcism, making him immune to sunlight and virtually unstoppable. Searching a nearby abandoned town, they suspect at least 30 new goons have been transformed. Guiteau volunteers as bait for the masters, allowing Jack to harpoon them and Montoya to drag them into sunlight with his jeep. While they manage to kill most of his lieutenants, Valak and his undead army overwhelm them at sundown. Crow is captured, Guiteau takes cover, and Montoya and Katrina flee, only for her to fully transform and bite Montoya on the throat, ripping his flesh off before joining Valak. Cardinal Alba reveals himself as Valak's ally. Having grown to fear death, he has agreed to help Valak recreate the original ritual in exchange for becoming a vampire himself. The ritual requires the participation of a priest and the blood and crucifixion of a crusader, Jack. Guiteau kills Alba before he can complete the ritual and holds off the vampire horde by threatening to kill himself and leave Valak without a priest. Montoya and Guiteau rescue Crow as the sun rises, and Crow confronts Valak, impaling him with the Berzier's cross and destroying him in daylight. Guiteau and Crow prepare to slay Montoya and Katrina, knowing their transformations are irreversible. However, to repay Montoya's 2 days of loyalty after being bitten, Crow grants them a 2-day head start. As Montoya and Katrina depart, Jack and Guito head off to kill the remaining vampires. Okay, so my first question to you guys before we really get into it is, did you get a little wood while watching this film?
Teak.
Yeah.
I feel like what you just described is not the movie I watched.
Maybe it wasn't. I don't know.
Uh-oh.
James Woods?
James Woods?
No.
Oh. Well, definitely James Woods is the
But this is
top
John Carpenter's Vampires.
Yeah. Yes.
It just seems to go under the name Vampires. I'm not sure
What's
why.
the one with John Bon Jovi?
That's a sequel.
Oh.
So...
Like a rip-off sequel, yeah.
I was just going through my Fire Stick and I saw John Carpenter Presents Vampires, da-da-da, and I just watched it. I didn't, no. I'm useless now. I didn't watch the right movie.
So...
Oh, dear.
Oh, man.
Oh, well. Sorry. like a couple of little things sounded similar, but I was like, wait a minute.
I was watching your face and I was like going, maybe you didn't get the same feeling at the end or something.
Yeah.
You were good until the seven masters started to be talked about, and then it was like your
Carpenter directed the first
one, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I was wondering why it was called John Carpenter's Vampires, because the second one is not directed by him.
Not directed by him at all.
I was confused. But not confused enough to double check. I just watched.
Well, you got me now because I've never seen it. I saw the John Bon Jovi was in it. I saw that it was not directed by Carpenter. The only thing I said is, oh, thank goodness Carpenter had enough of a hit that they're ripping it off or doing a sequel to it. He hasn't had a hit in a while.
I mean, it was entertaining. It wasn't bad. It wasn't great, but it wasn't bad. But I feel like a fucking idiot.
That's okay. I remember I watched the wrong movie. At least I caught it in time. I was like, we were doing Scott. We got a funny one for you.
Oh my god! The sequel came out in 2002.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Like
if
3 years.
Noticed a year, I might have caught on. All right. Anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to tell Scott what happened. I was texting you. One of the shows we did 2 recordings. One was I forget what the first one was, but the second one was 30 Days of Night.
Okay.
And for some reason, I was watching 28 Days Later, and about halfway through, my wife's like, "These are zombies. Aren't you supposed to be watching a vampire film?" And I was like, "Oh, fuck."
I think we've all had that kind of experience or something like that.
Yeah.
I had a thing where someone was wanting to be on my show, but the way that they talked, I thought I was on their show, that I was guesting on their show. And they sent me a Zoom link. So I'm like, oh, okay, great. They were just wondering why I hadn't sent one yet. They thought they were going to be a guest on my show. So we're sitting there and I'm going, so how do you want to start this? They go, well, however you want to do it. And I'm like, I don't know what you mean. Then it finally, at that moment when we're ready to record, just go, oh, I thought I was a guest on your show. I'm like, oh, fuck. Well, most people don't do that. But so it was one of those things where we laughed and then we went on with the piece. But it's amazing how easy it is to just you do this, and then some kind of weirdness will happen where you just screw it up. And I can't remember if I've ever watched the wrong movie, but I've certainly missed movies. I had that actually for this person who ended up being on the show that thought I was, whatever. They had like 20 movies they wanted to talk about. I'm like, fuck. And then I realized, and it was all about vampires, so it was perfect, that this is being talked about as well, because they wanted to talk about how somewhere along the line sex disappeared out of vampires, and when that happened, a lot of the metaphors fell apart, and so it was really interesting talking about that. But my brain fart was I thought Underworld and Twilight were the same movies. Oh, and I was like, oh, so half of them I hadn't seen. I'm like, oh, well, okay, so yeah, like I forgot. That's right. They both have werewolves and vampires, but they are 2 completely different franchises with 2 completely different feels.
Right.
So it does happen.
So, Mike, you want to continue and hang out, even if though you haven't seen the film?
Sure. Maybe there'll be something on the periphery that I can comment on.
You definitely, after this, you got to watch it because James Woods
I
is
gotta
just
watch it.
awesome.
Yeah.
He's so awesome. So, Scott, what was your first impression? When did you first see this, and what was your first impression?
I saw it the day it opened. I think it was October 30th of 1998 or 1999. I can't remember which.
It was 98.
And I had been waiting for it because I was a huge Carpenter fan. I was in film school still, and a few of the people who actually liked Carpenter, we all decided to go together. And so watching it, I had so much anticipation for it. And when I watched it, I was like, "Oh, this is frigging amazing." I was like, "This movie is, I love what they're doing here." But I also realized after watching it that with the people that I went with, we saw 2-3 different movies. So it's a really interesting film and how it works because it's very edgy, shall we say. And I'm going to talk quite a bit about this. I'm going to be very, very frank about where I am now with vampires, because I have recommended this movie for almost 2 decades. And I've championed this film when most people hadn't seen it. But I had friends with different backgrounds, with different belief systems, and everybody had a different feel about this movie. And so I was kind of like, wow, I can't believe that person walked away with that feeling about this movie. But I was looking at it in this really interesting way, that it was like an ultimate John Carpenter anti-hero movie, and where this is not Snake Plissken.
Right.
We're supposed to sympathize with Snake Plissken. We're not supposed to sympathize with this guy. Jack Crow is working for the man. It's a really interesting thing because John Carpenter is pretty much known for iconoclastic characters. He's known for outsiders. He's known for nihilistic stuff. He's known for anti-heroes. But most of the time, those anti-heroes are fighting against the system. They're fighting against the people who are in charge. He works for them.
Right.
And he gets betrayed by him, but he's part of the problem. If you look at what John Carpenter said about the movie, he said, I have the guys dressed up as they're supposed to be part conquistador, part crusader. And the thing that really sold me about this movie is that it's a very complex thing about the Old West done modern, but with vampires. So it's like the Searchers in the thing where John Chance, you don't know if he's a psycho or not. He's right. Going for the new world, but he's killing. He has absolute total hatred for the Indians. And his not his daughter, his niece, I think.
It was the niece,
niece gets captured, Natalie Wood. And so the whole movie is him going to go kill all these people to get her. And when he gets her, there's a moment when you believe, because she's been, quote unquote, dances with wolves. She's indoctrinated. He might kill her. We have a moment there when John Ford makes us go, he might kill her. John Chance doesn't. Jack Crow will.
Right.
And so there's a very interesting piece in this movie where what I really got out of it was, if you look at the camera angles and stuff like that that's in there, from the very beginning, you're watching a slaughter, a genocide of these vampires. Now, they're not human, right? But they're stand-ins. And so you're getting this real feeling about this movie's kind of like about colonialism before that became like a really big thing to talk about. Because Carpenter, he's always had the women who are Howard Hawks women, powerful.
Right.
They'll slug it out with. This one, no, there is none.
Right.
There's someone who's, it's like so antithesis of things that Carpenter normally does. And when I first saw it, I was like going, oh man, this is amazing. But the guy that was next to me goes, his whole thing was, I was really glad to see it. They had Mexicans as the vampires. It's always the white guy's the bad guy. And I'm like, fuck, that's what you got out of this movie. and I was like, you're kidding. And I started to realize, oh, this movie's treading in dangerous water. Even then, it was edgy for its time. I mean, this is the same guy that did They Live, right? This is the same guy that did all these things. But this movie really struck the ire of people,
Hmm.
and because it's misogynistic. And you can sit there and you can go, well, it's intentionally misogynistic. But then that's the thing that's interesting about watching it this past week. And I'll talk more about what happened with me on another show talking about this movie, because I recognize that this has not aged well. And if your metaphor and your allegory cannot stand the test of time, it doesn't matter if it was intentionally poking fingers at that kind of thing, if it's now only seen as that kind of thing. And that's an interesting point that happens with this film, that I was really shocked watching it. I was like going, fuck, it's still there, the stuff that I liked. But there is this thing that I can't ignore now that I've been talking with people who had never seen it. I recommended it to them. And they're like, you recommended this to me. I watched it because you recommended it to me.
Yeah.
But I must tell you, I was ready to turn it off after the 15-minute mark. This was not the John Carpenter that I knew. What happened here? And so it's really interesting. I think this is going to be an interesting show, because I wanted to deconstruct this where I went with it. But when I first saw it, which is the original question, I thought it was fantastic. My wife thought it was fantastic. We watched it every year for Halloween because it was one that we could get together with, because it's very much a peck and paw like Western. It's certainly not an old-fashioned Western. It's a modern Western, and it's about the brutality of making the West and what is lost. And it's really very overt once you start looking at it as about colonialism and that they're conquistadors or crusaders. They are basically killing people while they sleep. But before they go and do that, they have to sit and pray, because they have a figurehead of a church that's making this all land that's actually theirs. They're going to defend that land. And so it's really intriguing to watch how Carpenter even shoots this stuff. There's sequences in the very beginning, this great opening sequence. There's this fantastic fight in a barn.
Right.
But if this is supposed to be the heroes, there's no hero music. When they don't just kill them, they stab them 100 times. There's sticks hanging out of them everywhere. They have to pull them outside, let them blow up in flames, right? This is the only way you can get rid of a vampire, even though he's cutting off heads of the white guys later. He's not blowing them up. But there's this whole deal of where there's a sequence where there's a point of view camera. They're dragging one of the vampires out. And all of our heroes, right, our slayers, are looking down out of the shadows, shadowy faces, looking at us as the vampire going, have a nice barbecue, sweetheart. And we're hearing them screaming. There's a sequence where we're seeing shots of a bucolic farmland with this farmhouse on it, a pond. In the background, we're hearing this dirge kind of music, this very tense music, and we hear the screams. We're not hearing da-da-da-da-da, no heavy metal guitar music, nothing that you normally would have in a heroic act. Instead, we are seeing, this thing of the people screaming. There's a thresher in the foreground, a wheat thresher, the reaper, right? So you just get this whole idea. He's just tearing the shit out of the place. And at the end, they kill all these 9 goons, as they call them. Won't call them humans, and Woods is hilarious, but he's thoroughly nihilistic. He's a total misogynist. He hates everyone equally. That's the old hiding place for that. But the reality is he's special mean to women, right? He has 3 minutes in the movie where he's really mean to men. And then he's got 45 minutes where he's really mean to women. So maybe the scale's not exactly the same. And how he's mean to them is a little bit different. But what we get is the 9 bodies are there. They're making jokes. They actually have a scene where they're killing these people, and they show Montoya, who is one of the bald ones, outside with a headphone going like he's filling his tank with gas, right? We're supposed to see these people as heartless, right? We're not supposed to see these as heroes. We are supposed to be conflicted. That's how I looked at the movie Vampires. And I was so jazzed by that because this was right around the time of Fight Club and stuff like that. We're getting these anti-heroes that are really hard to like. And I thought that was really cool because we went through this time in the 80s where we had heroes that were really anti-heroes that we just kind of fudged some of the background that they were really heroes. Well, I had to do it because they killed my whole family. That, the price of meat went up, whatever it might be. There was a reason he was able to do that. And so I loved that there was consequence that was starting to happen in these horror movies and action films. And so I saw Carpenter as really going at that because he was not a fan of Reagan. He was not a fan of a conservative mentality, but he certainly is not someone that you go as, he's not Oliver Stone. He's got this interesting, I'm kind of an outsider kind of view on things. So I was totally into this movie, and watching it again, though, it is one of those things where it doesn't age well. It doesn't age well now that we have spent time learning a little bit about how we had blind spots. After 20 years, I can say I have some blind spots. And I saw that while I was watching this movie. And there were moments that I was like going, yeah, that's kind of hard to, that's hard to explain away, and it happened because I was talking to a woman filmmaker who respects my opinion greatly and watched this movie only because I said that she should watch it. She's like, Scott, we have to talk about this. She goes, I watched Blade, and these two movies are made at the same time. And Blade is really sexist too, which is really disappointing because it does so much about race, but then it has a blind spot for women. And it's really rude about how it deals with women. He goes, yes, I'm a woman, so I'm going to notice more. But let me tell you that there's moments in this movie that I was uncomfortable in how I felt the actress must have felt because of how she was being treated in this movie. And I'm like sitting there going, well, shit. He's doing that for a purpose because she's no longer human. This is really talking about how we turn people into things that we can kill by turning them into bad guys. And that's what it's really talking about. And she's like, yeah, but you also realize that he's also kicking a woman down the street. And he's kicking a woman down the street. And by the way, he's kicking a woman down the street. So you're telling me that I need to be okay with that because you're a guy who has this metaphor from 1998. And it was like, you're right. Why am I arguing with you about this? That's crazy. Even if I was right at that time, it was never right because let's put it this way. It was not John Carpenter's vampires and in the trailer, they're showing him kicking her down the road and calling her all sorts of fucking names. No, that's just the flavoring that's in the movie. What we show is good and evil. Obvious, real easy good and evil in the trailer. And so that is a thing that was happening, but it was never right. And even if he was commenting on it, if it's no longer, if your comment is so spot on that no one can tell the difference, perhaps that's not great. And so it really did temper me in this viewing. I was stunned because I have championed this motherfucking film around horror fans who are like, I think it's great for the first 20 minutes and then it's boring as shit. And there's some truth to that too, that it's obvious that they ran out of money. It's obvious, like this movie had 2/3 of its budget was cut.
Right. Yeah.
Right before they started. And I think part of that is because when it was first coming out, it had been around for a while and Russell Mulcahy was the director and it's supposed to be a futuristic movie where vampires are everywhere. And the Slayers were more like a police force, that there were a bunch of them around. Whereas I think what happens is Carpenter goes, well, shit, I can make this as a Western. They go, well, nobody's going to see that. And they cut it. We were looking for another Blade, man. Blade's coming out, right? You want to go and do a Western? Well, fuck you. You get 1/3 of what we were going to give the guy.
It was supposed to be $60 million, and they gave him $20 million.
They gave him $20 million. So that's still a pretty, Catherine Bigelow, we talked about a couple weeks ago or whatever, that movie, $5 million, looks fantastic. John Carpenter's vampires, you can see the seams. In some scenes, literally see the seams. There's a spot where the vampire, there's this murder that happens, this massacre inside of a hotel. And there's a sequence where he punches through a guy to grab another guy, which looks awesome until you realize that you can see the Scotch tape that they taped the fucking hole to the body part and it pops right up into the screen. And you're like, oh my God. When I saw it in the movie theater, it's 50 feet, right? And I'm
Right.
like going, I can't believe he has that in here. Carpenter's usually really good about, if nothing else, making sure things match. And so anyway, the thing that was interesting about this was how much I fought for this movie. And I still believe that there's greatness inside of this story about colonialism. I do believe that he was trying to do a little bit of peck and paw. And so he was going down this grittier, darker road. I think he felt like he was being very brave in that way. In commentary, he talks about being edgy even for the times, that he wanted to push on the very edges of what people were normally allowing to be respectable. I wrote so much shit about this.
Oh,
I have note after note after note that I love, and note after note that I was like, damn, I can't believe that I didn't notice that. I mean, the vampire slayers are grim, they're amoral. The movie is all about amorality in that way. There's amorality in the idea of divine, what's that called? Eminent domain, the idea of what was being done for the land here.
All right, I'm going to have to stop you there for a second because I disagree with you on that point. First of all, I didn't get any colonialism out of this viewing. I saw this when it first came out too, and I liked it. I had the feeling that the word misogyny was going to come up, but as you said, they're monsters. They're no longer human. So in that regard, his characters don't treat them like humans anymore. But I don't understand the colonialism thing because the vampires didn't rule the land and we took it over from them. They're demons that infiltrated our world. It's the reverse.
Right. Well, are we going to be literal now, or are we going to start talking about allegory and metaphor? Because we're going to talk literal. The church also doesn't have vampire slayers, and there aren't really vampires.
Right.
We're going to talk allegory and metaphor. It doesn't have to be that. Like, what do they say in that movie? We know there's vampires. Other people don't. We also know there's a God, but we don't understand him. So you're going on the idea that vampires didn't rule the world, but we don't know that. We know that Valak was turned into a vampire from a reverse exorcism, whatever that means.
Right.
But my thing is, he is setting this up as cowboy in India. And he is setting it up as Indian gets massacred by guys that are coming across who are working on the idea that this is for God. And God is corrupt if it's done in the way of the church. The church actually betrays the guy. So the whole movie is vampires, if you want to look at it as vampires. But there's even scenes where Valak's walking and his cape is cut in the back so that it looks like he's wearing chaps as the wind blows his legs up against the thing. He's the bad, the black-hatted bad guy coming in. But you have this whole thing of, what it's in the Southwest. Why is it in the Southwest? Could have been anywhere, right? It's in the Southwest. They're brown. They're getting killed. And you've got these guys who are wearing this conquistador gear that is working on it. So when I was watching, I was going, why am I feeling edgy about these guys? Why am I worried about these guys? And the idea that, they're no longer humans, like, tag, you're it. Now I can, now the metaphor is completely different because you're now a monster. So I'm going to be able to beat up a woman and say, look, it's a monster. It's not Sherilyn Fenn. I'm telling you, it's not Sherilyn Fenn. It's now a vampire Sherilyn Fenn. We've even changed her blood type for you. No, it's still this fucking thing, right? It's why did he do it that way, right? Why didn't he have them turn gray or purple or have red eyes or big fangs that are always showing? No, he makes absolutely sure in the broad daylight, which you normally don't see vampires in, a beautiful woman who looks like she's sick getting kicked in her ass down the street, right? So he's trying to get us to feel very uncomfortable at that moment. There's an exit ramp that says, well, they're monsters, sure. But I don't think that's, if
I get the impression, though, that we're reading a little bit too much into it than what Carpenter had, because here's one thing I pulled from the web. I mean, obviously, it's on the web, so it must be true. But I thought this was interesting. He said he had a bunch of other guys he wanted to be, but he ended up with James Woods, and he wanted James Woods because he wanted James Woods because,
He never has been in that kind of role before.
Right.
He's always a bad
And
guy.
yeah, James Woods wanted to do a horror movie, but he also said the Vampire Slayer, he wanted the Vampire Slayer to be as savage as the prey he's after, a guy who's
Right.
just as menacing as the vampires. James Woods is the kind of guy that you would believe could and would chew the leg off a vampire.
Yeah.
So I don't have a problem with his character. I think that's exactly what they needed to fight the vampires.
Yeah, that changes nothing that we've talked about at all. It's exactly true, right? Hasn't changed a damn thing. Yeah, yes, I agree. And yet the problem is he kicks a woman down the street. They call her all sorts of names. They actually sit her and make her naked on a bed, right? And then Montoya says, "I cleaned you up. I helped you out. I tied you to the bed, but I saved your ass." Like, okay, then it's all good, right? 3 out of 4, it must all be good, right? The thing is, this is a set of ideas that show up in the movie, right? And those are set in the movies to be sexual in certain ways. And in movies, this is something that was brought up to me. She goes, there was this spate where if you watch it, there's this moment in time, and I do believe that horror, whether we like it or not, whether it's conscious or not, it is talking about what's going on around us because it's supposed to get a rise out of us, one way or the other. Even with slashers, when people were sitting there saying, well, it's very violent against women. Well, it was violent against women. They go, yeah, the guy in a wheelchair got killed. Yeah, the guy in a wheelchair goes around a corner and gets hit in the head with an axe. The woman's going, in between a guy's legs with a fucking blade going back and forth. There's a little bit of a fucking difference there. But not only that, the idea is I'm okay with that because it is also political. Right? When you're sitting there saying, I dislike that you're doing this, what did the guys that made slashers do? They doubled down. They made them twice as nasty. So it is a point being made, even if the point seems simplistic. You're talking about what's going on. We got fucking Saw and Hostel like a year after Abu Ghraib. There's no fucking coincidence there. We're basically having the government say, well, we have to have some court cases and talk about whether this is really torture or not. Well, we have pictures of people, the world's fascinated on whether or not we're going to say it's torture or not. And the next year we have torture porn, where the biggest thing that's going on is people on chairs tied up. Yeah. Does it mean that that's specifically political? No, it's always going to have this kind of thing, consciously or unconsciously, because horror needs to know what freaks us out, what bothers us, what irritates us. That's what sells tickets. That's what exploitation has always been about. Doesn't necessarily mean it's always a good mirror. Doesn't mean it always makes us look good, but it also doesn't mean that at many times it's not making a very interesting comment. So one of the things that this woman was talking to me about when I was on this show was, did you realize that Monica Lewinsky, there was this whole thing about Monica Lewinsky right about then, and overnight, women became the brunt of all these jokes, untrustworthy, and there started to be extra violence in the movies around women at that point. And I was like, well, and she named a few, including Blade, and I was like going, I can argue with you, but does it really make sense for me to argue? Because I'm not hypersensitive to it. I'm not even sensitive to it until it's brought up to me. As a person who loves horror movies, I think a horror movie can take the slings and arrows, and it doesn't make me any worse or better when I'm looking at these things. I think it still has a lot of value. I think it's still got a lot of excellent points, but I also do not apologize for it. I don't apologize for where we were culturally. Like I said, this was that kind of acting, or not acting, those actions that are in that movie, they're never good. Jack Crow is not someone you want to spend time on a bus with. You're not going to let your daughter sit next to him. No. We know he's not a good person in that way. We're entertained by him because in comedy, we love to watch people do things that we would never get away with. And in horror, we want to see people in situations we never want to be in. And so it is a vicarious way to look at it. But to say that it's not misogynist because of the times, no, it was never good. It's never good.
No, I'm not saying that. I try not to get political on the show. In fact, I never get political on the show.
I'm sorry.
I don't like to offer an opinion one way or the other, but I do like to remind people, like I was doing on my other show, the Cult Movie Lounge, we were talking about a film called The Mercenary by Sergio Corbucci and starred Franco Nero, and he was a Polish character, and his nickname that people called him was the Polak. And, you know, I had to remind my co-host that, because he was like, oh, well, we can't really say that. We can't really say. I said, it's in writing. It's the name of his character. I said, people need to understand when they watch older films, they have to understand the context of the time in which they were made. And to your point, it doesn't mean it's right or wrong or it's good or bad. It's just you have to understand the mentality from when they were coming from. And if you can do that, then you can continue to enjoy or discuss the film, you know?
Sure. Well, there's context, right? Now we're in context. I have not gotten out of the context for 1 second. You know, we get to still talk about it. See, my thing is we have a tendency to do an all or nothing. We either sit there and we say, this is all about this kind of thing, or it doesn't exist at all. Like we shouldn't talk about it. Like you should say, well, his name's the Polak. The Polak's kind of offensive, but at this point, he was called the Polak,
right?
You know, and that's how and you may never say the character's title again. You don't apologize for it. You don't hide it,
right?
Right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I think is important. I believe in and statements now, because you know what? Or statements got me. Or statements got me Weinstein. Or statements got me, you know, all these fucking guys that get away with all this shit. You know, that's what I got for saying I can separate the art from the artist. All it did was make them more brazen. All it did was get them, you know, all these people are hurt. It's like when people sit there and go, you know, the great movies that Polanski did. And I love Polanski and I own Polanski movies. How I learned to live with that is that anytime anybody wants to tell me what a rapist he is, I listen because he is. And then he also made these movies. So I get both. I need to be able to be man enough in my world to do both and accept both. You know, I don't hide. I don't pretend to make other people think that what they're thinking because they think it feels terrible, that they're wrong. They're not wrong if I'm not wrong. So my thing is, you know, the idea is that we still have to grab onto it. So this movie has a lot of stuff in it that is just wrong. Yet, for this character, it's a truly intriguing piece.
Right.
You know, it is a dark and nasty and violent thing. And to me, because I grew up with Popeye Doyle and stuff like that. I mean, that's another thing that's really important. You have to look at, do you think Popeye Doyle is a hero? You know,
right.
Do you think Travis Bickle was a hero? You know, or were they anti-heroes? Were they somebody that did something really interesting, but also were cautionary tales? We also have to remember that we're dealing in horror movies, right? And I also say that Taxi Driver and movies like French Connection, even though that's based on a true story, the way that they tell that story is a horror movie universe. Dirty Harry is a horror movie universe. Nothing works, including the fire department. The fire department doesn't even know how to save someone who's going to try and jump off of a building. Good old Harry has to go up on the ladder because the world's broken, right? Why does the entire world have to be broken? Because that's the only way Dirty Harry makes enough sense that you're going to allow him to break his own laws to take the person down. He is a wish fulfillment. There's nothing wrong with wish fulfillment as long as we recognize that. And that's why sometimes those movies are a little bit scary, because you'd have people who are like, I want to be Paul Kersey from Death Wish. Well, you shouldn't really want to be Paul Kersey from Death Wish. First off, your wife has to get raped.
Right.
Your daughter has to commit suicide. These are not good starts. Yeah. So with that, that's the kind of person I can still respect this movie and love the character or like the character or appreciate the movie for what it is.
Right.
But these are the things that I see. And so I own all of it because I don't apologize for bad behavior.
Right. Well, that being said, this is based on a novel, so I'm curious to know.
Yeah.
I know that Carpenter went through a lot of changes and scripts and stuff. How much of the novel is in the movie? Do you know?
I shouldn't say quite a bit. The author says all my dialogue's in there, none of the plot. There's the plot. So basically, the book is more of like, I mean, the name of it is Vampires of the Dollar Sign.
Right. Yes.
So it's really going all out on the idea of this is I don't know if eminent domain's the right way to say it, but this is a group of people coming out of Monterey. They have like this big palace and everything like that. And they're very much an organization that's across the globe. You kind of get that in a very quick moment when he goes back to see Maximilian Schell, who's the bishop, the cardinal. He talks about the other groups, the cells that are killed. Well, in there, Jack Crow is not as mean, not nearly as mean. He's a businessman, right? And what happens is he finds out that his business is crooked. Yeah. So that part is where it's still in the movie. But the changes that have happened, I think there's like 3-4 different writers. I think Carpenter did one Ghost that he didn't have his name on it. There were 2 other versions that were out there that went in 2 completely different directions. He took pieces from here, and all of that, and gave one guy the credit. And so I don't know. I forget what the writer's
Don Jacoby. Yeah. Who
So
also wrote Life Force and Death Wish 3.
Oh my God. Well, Life Force, holy cow. There's one like I have a feeling Don is used to not seeing his words actually on the screen, because Life Force that's just a madhouse. I love that movie too. Yeah. And that's another way, there's all sorts of crazy in that I loved. But this, I loved the dirt of it. I love the grunginess of the movie. I love the nastiness of it. And yet, I have to also say, man, it was hard to watch a lot of this stuff knowing what I know now. I can't say that I haven't learned a few lessons over the last 20 years. And so watching it was somewhat uncomfortable. It was really uncomfortable hearing some of the audio commentary, which I love that audio commentary, but Carpenter lets a few things slip that are like, oh boy, that's unfortunate. I'll bet he wishes he could erase that, because it's just stuff that is somewhat demeaning of the actors that are on there.
Oh, interesting.
But not demeaning, like objectifying. That's what I should say. He unfortunately objectifies at a certain point that I was like, oh, dude, maybe if I didn't have that conversation with that person that I had, I wouldn't have noticed that as obviously. But yeah, it's kind of an apology that shouldn't be there. It's one of the things that the movie had happening a lot, where he says, a lot of people say that the violence is excessive, but we're saying that monsters are really excessive. And I get that. I completely get that. But if you're making them look exactly like human beings, you're begging for me to make that comparison, right? We're getting that energy for a reason. Like when we were talking about Near Dark. I don't like when it's a vampire kid was mentioned. Why? Well, they can be little vampires, but it's a kid, right? So mentally, it's troubling. It's like in Dawn of the Dead, where 2 zombies who are children come at Ken Foree, and he throws them down and he guns them down with an M16. And he said that really hurt him to do. It was a scene that bothered him a lot because it's children. That imagery is there for a purpose. And something that Romero always said was that his zombies look like zombies or like people for 2 reasons. One, super cheap, which is certainly going to work for you. But number 2 is they are us. Right. You're supposed to be conflicted. We are the Walking Dead. And so that is an interesting way to look at it. So I can't fault anybody who would watch this movie and go, how could you like this character?
Yeah.
How could you like him? Yeah.
Sometimes, you used the word subtext a few minutes ago, and that's, there's always interpretations and levels to things that, like, I don't even notice half the time the first time I watch it. And then, so sometimes somebody else will point it out. But you said that you've watched this movie many, many times. Your wife used to watch it every Halloween.
Yeah.
Out of all those times, a lot of the stuff never bothered you, and then it was like within the last couple of years or recently?
Yeah, it was just this last viewing, really.
Oh, okay.
It was where I hadn't watched it for years. I had it on in the background during Halloween. You get busy at Halloween. I put it in another movie. Vampires. I'd see the first couple of minutes and be done. And then I would. But I watched it. We probably watched it religiously for 10 years on Halloween. And the whole thing was that I was able to accept it on that level, no problem. Easy to forget when everybody else is agreeing with you. right? Everybody agreed, this is it. And the people who didn't were politically correct assholes or whatever. Something I could do to make them wrong and me not. And so, to me, it was just like, you have a sense of humor, you don't. No, that's not true at all. That's real cop-out. But the thing is that that's kind of where I went with this movie, because I'm looking at the history of Carpenter's films and what he's done. He's had all these strong women characters that are in these movies where they don't get help. The Fog, Adrienne Barbeau in The Fog has to fend everything off herself. Assault on Precinct 13, the secretary that's in there has to fend for herself. She has her own gun. All these movies have these strong women. It's missing in this film. Right? It's not there.
I did notice that when watching it this time around.
No Hoxian strong woman. And he's not punching up. It's the first time he's not punching up. It's always the man. Fuck the man. Snake Plissken destroys the universe, takes the satellites out because fuck the man. Fuck the man's screwing everybody up. It's corrupting everybody. Fuck the rich. He's always that. This time it's, monsters, but he's working for the church. They seem to be taken care of. And you've got these people who, the way that he makes them look, they're just savages. And that's one of the words that he uses a lot, and it's brought up a lot. Savages, which John Ford used, right? But John Ford back then was commenting that John T. Chance was walking on very, very, very shaky ground. He was like, I've read that, who was it? Bogdanovich talked about that, where it's like, this might have been like the first Psycho movie, like the first Death Wish kind of film, is The Searchers, where he is completely, you're not supposed to like that when someone is so obsessed that they become, they're the perfect killing machine. It's the killing machine we need. Okay, so we should be looking at ourselves, right? We don't just go, that's it. We got a killing machine. Good to have one. Yeah, because everybody's got one. Well, great. But what does that say? Are we artists or are we politicians, right? So to me, it is something to take a look at. And so I thought that it's really interesting watching it, because my whole thing all these years has been, like Barry Bonds hitting home runs. It's like, yeah, Barry Bonds is a great home run hitter, but I wouldn't want to take a long bus ride with him. I think he's a jerk, right? That's just a thing, right? So I look at the people on Crow's team, and I love how they set it up like Red River. So Red River is another John Ford movie, where these two guys who are cohorts, and they have rules of the land, right? They have to follow these rules. And so the end of the movie is one betrays the other, and he gives them the head start that is in this movie as well, that Montoya gets thing. But what I think is funny in this movie is that Crow has all these rules. Rule number 3, rule number 7. He doesn't follow one. He never follows one of his rules. He just says them. He's stating them for other people, but it's for other people, not for him.
Right.
He gets to walk as King Kongs all across this world, jolly green giants walking this earth, from Full Metal Jacket. So it's interesting. You can watch this as a very cool, like, I love Taxi Driver.
Yeah.
Do I think that Travis Bickle is a hero? No, that's not a hero. He does an interesting heroic thing, which makes it a complicated story, which is what's interesting. What used to be so great about the 70s was that you would have these things where you didn't try to hide, moral obligations.
Right.
You would just sit there and have this madness happen. And that's how I felt about Jack Crow. This is not a good guy. This is someone who does the right thing towards the end, once he finds out that he's been working for bad guys the whole time and setting them up. Everything that this church was all about, the bishop betrays, or the cardinal betrays, because he's getting old now. Now it matters to him.
Right. Yeah.
Now that it's actually affecting him, now it's a fucking problem. And so that is, I still appreciate this film, but I see it in a totally different light, which makes me not want to just randomly, as I did, recommend it, because I recommended it on the idea of this anti-hero Western with vampires as Indians, but not taking it like the cowboy is the good guy. That is complicated. And that there's this whole thing about how it's being shown in the film language that Carpenter is using that tells me we're not supposed to like this guy, you know, that he needs redemption. There are times when he just randomly looks over at a cross hanging, right? He believes in God, but he doesn't believe in the institution that he's working for. Right. He's in this constant crisis of faith. He's had his family killed because somebody hid the fact that they were a vampire, and it ended up killing his family. So he has a real hatred for this woman. Doesn't see her anymore as a woman. She's now a vampire, right? But again, that's where it gets sticky, right? Because he's also not really good to police officers. He's certainly not good to bodyguards. Doesn't like the priests, you know. So there's
the shit out of that one priest.
Yeah, kicks the priest.
The whole movie.
In fact, that's the funny thing. He's like if you believe in betas. I don't know if I believe in alpha males and beta males, but yeah, he's a beta male, right? The priest, until he shows that he's a man and he can kick ass like anything else. He gets the shit kicked out of him. He's a whimperer. He's got these little glasses that make him a little bit cute, you know. So you know, there's all this stuff that makes him an unlikable character. But he's a fascinating character. And there's the difference, right? Not likable. I don't have to apologize for a fascinating character. The world's full of complicated people that are still worth talking about. And that's where I put Jack Crow as a character in a movie that is problematic and yet still a fascinating look at a way to look at horror and Westerns blending together.
Right, right. I mean, I loved the whole sequence at the beginning when they're the whole, in my mind, just to see a cool team of vampire killers going into a nest to, first of all, why didn't they just burn the house down? Why do they have to go in one by one? Right. Secondly, why aren't they wearing, where's my fingers? Oh, it's not a video anyways. Secondly, why aren't they wearing leather armor and neck protection? At one point, I think they give the priest that neck thing. Yeah, but that should be standard issue for what they're doing.
Well, they do have it. The one who doesn't, because he's too cool and too tough, is James Woods.
James Woods, yeah.
He doesn't wear it. He's in the front, and he's the one who doesn't need it, right? But everybody else, you know, they have the little chainmail and stuff.
I didn't notice that they all have the neck protection.
So they have that stuff, and they have, you know, it's something that Carpenter says in the audio commentary. He said he wanted to make them part conquistador and part the other thing. I have it written here somewhere. Man, I have way too many notes about this movie. But I think so much of my feelings about it because it's been in my life forever. Carpenter's my favorite director of all. So part conquistador, part crusader. So he was going for this whole thing of we have spears. Why do we have spears? Because that feels medieval. It also feels like it could be a religious, one of those things called where they have the cross on top of it.
Oh, yeah.
He goes, he was always blending the idea of what conquistador and crusader, right? Not knights. He said conquistador, crusader.
Yeah.
These are invaders. So, you know, there's that whole thing that he was trying to go for. And I think it's there for the big betrayal, right? It's there for the big betrayal. You're on the side of right. You can do anything under righteousness. And then you find out you're on the wrong side. You're the bad guy. That's a very interesting place to put a character.
Right, right. And one thing I liked was that Carpenter had a deal with James Woods, who really wanted to improvise. He's like, just do the lines as they are, and then I'll let you improvise. And when he wanted him to be, you know, more focused and disciplined, he would use the take that went by the script verbatim.
Yeah. He had himself a real time with him. And I think there's so much that's cool about low budget filmmaking that they're doing in this movie. And it's interesting. It's the first time that he's using a cinematographer other than, or is it the second time? It's the second time. I think They Live was also Gary Kibbe, but he had predominantly, used, oh my goodness, Dean Cundy for most of his films.
Right.
And so he was using a new guy for cinematography, and he was using new music as well. So up till then, it's Alan Haworth, and then he breaks from Alan Haworth, and I think this is when you start really getting the soundtrack gets a little repetitive. It gets very bluesy. It happened in They Live, and it happened in there. That there's just Haworth has this thing where I think he opens it up just a little bit more. It's not terrible, but it is something that I noticed, especially watching this time around, that soundtrack doesn't open up Like, say, when we're listening to Near Dark, and you have Tangerine Dream, just has this really, and it's funny because Tangerine Dream is kind of like, or Carpenter is kind of like Tangerine Dream, depending upon which way you want to look at it. They have that very ethereal, keyboard-driven piece that usually works in their stuff.
Right.
But but I love what he did. Low budget wise, he's tight and lean. Made sets when he needed to make sets, was on location when he needed to do locations. The location of the barn in the very beginning of the movie was from an Italian cowboy movie that was made there, and they just redressed it so it looked more gothic.
Wow.
The inside was a sound stage at the University of New Mexico, and the elevator was just a box, and the background was your paper roll. So it looked like rocks going by.
Oh,
and
that's cool.
I think he donated that to the university so that they have this prop. So wherever he could, he was always trying to make this thing of it's Gothic, but also utilitarian. It's Gothic, but it's also Western. So if you look at how he's setting up all the staging and how it looks, he's always trying to get this feeling of spaghetti Western. I think Sergio Leone is all over this movie. I think especially in the beginning where they're all standing outside of the farmhouse and there's that slow zoom in on his face and a zoom out on the thing. That's Once Upon a Time in America right there.
Oh, yeah.
And then if it's not Leone, then it's Peckinpah. And Peckinpah did kick women around an awful lot. They were all whores in his movies. So another really complicated guy that I champion, but I never pretend that his movies weren't really, really rough viewing. So I love what he did with those things. I think Thomas Ian Griffith is kind of wasted, though. I think as Valak, he could have made him just a little bit cooler. This is a martial arts champ, right?
Right.
He's a guy who could do all sorts of stuff. They don't really have him move that much. But I love how they play with the Southwest so much. They play with the Western so much. There are these broad shots. Like the one shot that I think is just such a champion shot is when the priest is getting beaten up on the side of the road because Jack Crow knows that he's bullshitting. Right. He's not telling him the whole story. So he throws him out and he's beating him up and he puts a gun to him and he says, "I don't know." And as he says, "I don't know," it cuts to a long shot of a canyon. They're right on the edge of a valley, right? And it's just this beautiful picturesque thing. But it's a little part of the right-hand corner is the priest and Jack Crow. And I'm like, that's so Western. That's so John Ford. And that's so Carpenter. It's not necessary to the story, but it is right for the story.
Right. And it's a pivotal moment, though. It's when Jack is looking at him, and you can see in James Woods' face, he believes him. It takes him a minute. You can kind of see the wheels going in his head, and he's like, "Okay, you're part of the team. Let's go." Yeah.
Well, there's the whole thing where he has to nearly stab him in the hotel room, which I think happens after that, right?
Right. Yeah.
And that's where it's like, who's lying to me? He feels that everybody's lying to him. And the weird thing is, they are lying to him because he's a psycho. You can't fuck up with this guy. Montoya can't trust. Nobody can trust him. He's ready to blow his best friend away at certain points. He gives him 2 days.
Right.
We've been through everything, but you lied to me. But you were straight to me. At least you protected me in the end. But you know what? You're dead.
Right. And he knew it. Baldwin knew it. But I just wanted to jump back to the music for a split second and say there was a moment where they're driving into Santiago and you see the sign that says Santiago, and that music was very spaghetti Western right in that spot there.
Yeah. Oh, there's beautiful spaghetti Western stuff that's in that movie. The whole killing of the monks.
Yeah.
When they run in, they're like throwing monks up against the wall. And how do you know they're dead? Because there's a big spot of blood on the wall when they fell. They just fell like a wet smudge. Yeah, it was like a sponge on the back of the head or something. They just knock them up. But it works. It's very effective. And it's very much, the end is so much of a Western. Meet me high noon, except it's high midnight.
Right.
We're going to have the guy strapped to the
cross.
He's on a cross in the town center, town square. And that's unfortunately where it becomes obvious that they ran out of money, right? There's no big end to the movie.
Right.
And it does lose some of the pacing that I never noticed 10 years ago when I was watching it every year at Halloween. I never noticed that it gets really slow at certain points because they split up the remaining. So for those that haven't seen this movie, there is a massacre that happens at a hotel after they kill off a whole bunch of these vampires. Somehow they knew that they were coming. We then find out it's a double cross from the people who are actually paying this guy to work, but it ends up killing just about all of his team. And there's this huge massacre, all of this stuff. You're like, oh, wow, this is incredible. But after that, there is a split between the two surviving members, the right-hand man and the guy in charge. And when that happens, there's a dynamic shift that just, it's obvious that they needed to do more exposition because they didn't have the money to show you, which is normally where Carpenter would go. And so they split it up by having part of it in Monterey and part of it in a hotel room and a beautiful hotel, you know, all this stuff to make it look like something. But it became obvious at a certain point watching it this time. It's like, damn, he just ran out of money. He had to save it all like Corman used to. Save it all for the last reel. Start blowing shit up at that point. But it felt kind of forced at the end.
Yeah.
It didn't have this, like, especially, it especially becomes obvious because he's so much mimicking Sam Peckinpah. And if you're going to inform your movie with the Wild Bunch, you have to have a fuck of an ending.
Right.
You have to have an ending that's like, wow, holy shit. And that doesn't happen. It's very subdued in that way.
Yeah.
And I remember even when I saw it in the theater, I loved the movie, but I did feel, it's like, that end is a little, you know, it's kind of downer. But yeah, but you know, Carpenter does downer endings every so often.
You mentioned the massacre in the hotel room, and I loved it. Like right off the bat, Mark Boone Jr. is playing Catlin, and he opens the door, and Valak just with his own fingers just slices him right in half.
Yeah. Oh, I love how they do that.
Great.
Yeah, I love how they do that. It's a KNB effect. And this movie had to get cut, and it was censored because there were a couple really violent deaths that were in there, including a priest getting his head blown off with a shotgun. They had shown that in the original piece, and they had to cut that out. But there's this great moment, which is so Carpenter. What I love is that Carpenter has this real flair with violence. It's editing to show more than what you actually see. One of my favorite moments of that is sometimes he extends time and sometimes he contracts time. Here he extends time like he did in The Fog. In The Fog, the first deaths are on this ship, and it uses a flashlight falling to the ground to make something that is bam, 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 killing last. Right. So you have this whole thing of like the flashlight hits the ground. Oh, we see the first stab. Then the flashlight rolls. Oh, the second stab.
Right.
And we get this constant thing. And in here, Mark Boone gets the slash, and we see his hair blow. And his face still looks the same, like he can't understand what has happened. And then Valak flips his hand back out of him. And we don't know necessarily what's happening, but now the wind goes past his hair again, but this time there's a splat of blood that goes over his face. This is something that in real life, in real world timing, that most directors would do. They just chop him in half, the body would fall in two. But Carpenter does this great thing of extending that by having these cuts. And then when he falls to the ground to his knees, when he splits open, it's like, fuck, what a great effect.
Yeah.
That's a style thing that I love out of Carpenter.
Yeah. And, you know, it's funny, you mentioned, uncomfortable things in this movie. I have to say, normally when I'm watching a film for the show, I'll write down lines of dialogue here and there that I think are funny, and I'll say them. And I couldn't write any of them because I,
Well, you got to say would, right?
That's would. Yeah, that one. But there was one I wrote. Oh, and of course, Mike's gone. I wanted him to hear this one, too.
Strata Chocolata?
Oh, there you go. There's one hilarious line of dialogue. I mean, James Woods, this movie's, you thought The Hard Way was chock full of hilarious lines from him.
Oh, my God, yeah.
This movie, he's got a bunch of great ones, too. And at one point, the priest is going to go and be the one to lure the vampires. He's going to be the bait. So James Woods goes, okay, Padre, lather up and shave your ass. You're the bait.
Yeah. And that's there's a great one that was in the trailer, but edited for the trailer, which is like, Let me tell you about vampires. Vampires aren't like what you see in the movies. They're not wearing cheesy Euro trash, hypnotizing people. He goes, that's not what they do. And crosses, they don't work. Silver bullets, they don't work. He goes, garlic, you want to wear garlic? Wear garlic around your neck, and they'll bend you over and take a dance on your strata chocolata.
Yeah.
And so it's fantastic, right? But it's also fucking rude as shit. But I find that stuff really funny. That's just funny.
Yeah.
And I think rude as shit. And there's a lot of that in there. There's a lot of talk of dicks. It's very manly. You got to get a hard dick before you go and kill everybody. Yeah. And that works with the character, right? It works with the character. Except, it's funny though, because it's James Woods, right?
Yeah. Right.
So James Woods has that acidic ability, and he is a great actor. So he's able to have this rage that shows up. But he's also a tiny man, and he's skinny. And so it takes a bit of him acting. He has to have a gun or something on him a lot. In the beginning, he goes up against a really heavy set guy, a vampire, and he's basically on him. He's like crawled up on him, and he's stabbing him with this thing, and he's pounding. He's like, God damn it, just fucking die.
Yeah.
And he's like, and it's great. It feels very realistic, and it's also not pretending that he's Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Right.
He's this little guy, and so it was an interesting choice. James Wood was an interesting choice to put there.
Right.
But it is. As time changes things, it's not always easy.
And that's why I was kind of wondering, why are these guys carrying around pistols through the whole movie? They don't work on the vampire.
They don't work, right? They just slow them down.
Slow them down. That's what I was gonna say. But the other thought was, well, he does kind of look cool with it. So.
Well, that's it, and it's also funny. I mean, it's one of those things. Like I love a lot of really interesting tough guy movies and stuff, and this is one of those movies that if you look at the trivia on IMDb, not only do they tell you about where it was shot and stuff like that, they tell you the model and make of the handguns that this person's using. So it falls into that type of film. And there's a lot of stuff that makes no sense, but it works thematically or visually. So like they have they have some kind of circular device that they put over doorknobs, and they press a couple buttons, and whoop, it makes a perfectly good hole and takes the doorknob out. And like, well, it's like a pile of doorknobs somewhere. You could have just kicked it in. There's a whole bunch of things you could have fucking done, but that looked cool. And then they have like a big truck that 12 guys are in. And in the commentary, he says, Carpenter goes, there's our Slayer van. He goes, in the movie, they're supposed to be back in there. But of course, in real life, that'd be really fucking hot in the middle of the desert. And we're not going to get 12 actors to just sit in there. He says, so when we open it up, that's the first time those guys are in there for maybe a couple minutes. But it's the idea of like, that's what you would do. You'd only have one vehicle. Like, why would, or they had two vehicles.
Right. The Jeep and that
because Crow understands egress, right? Everybody else has to get one truck to get the fuck out of there if everything goes bad. But he has a special one. He's the general, right? The general's going to be up on the hill with a little Jeep. So I cracked up that they have it looks cool, but there's not a lot of sense to it. And I think he plays at that. Like there's a whole thing in the very beginning where they're sneaking into this building, right? And one of the guys is about to open a door and he goes, slow, careful, be quiet. And the guy goes, and he opens it up real fast. He's like, Jesus Christ. And he's like looking at him. He's like, oh. And then Crow's walking and he has his gun. He's ready to open this door. And we're all looking at this door. And he kicks a can. And he goes, and he just looks at everybody. And it's like, so they're playing with it. He's being very playful with this stuff. They have, the winches that they use to pull these guys out. But a perfectly good question that you asked is like, why not just burn the building down, right? And wait outside.
Wait outside.
It's daylight.
Runs out,
Anybody comes out, they're going to blow into, like when they catch fire here, they don't just catch fire. It's like Roman candles are going off underneath their clothing. It's like, boom. And it's cool as shit because of that. But it also is not very logical. Their attacks are not very logical. And I mean, if you're trying to be macho, why come when they're sleeping, right? So they're half smart, but they're not thoroughly smart. They don't go all the way.
I almost got the impression at the beginning that they were a relatively new team for him, because there was even one guy that was kind of cowardly, and he basically told him, suck it the fuck up and get in there.
I haven't a clue if it's a new team. They never mentioned that. It may as well be, or it may as well be that you're just never going to satisfy this fucker. If you're on his team, just be ready for you're never good enough for Jack Crow. Jack Crow is going to, he's going to find something wrong with everybody. But I think it's interesting that even the police, nobody is looking at these guys as good guys. It's like, when are you guys going to get out of town? I've spent a week rounding up whores and booze for these guys. When are they going to get out of this hotel? And he's like, we'll get out this tonight. He goes, I can't say that I'm sorry to see you go.
Right.
These are your heroes, right? So it's not like we're supposed to kind of like these guys in the way we begrudgingly do, right?
But then James Wood says to the cop, did you get the package we sent you? And he goes, yeah, I did.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because they get money, right? And that's supposed to make everything okay too, right?
Yeah.
Hey, I pay y'all. It doesn't matter how I run my ship.
Right.
And so there's that kind of thinking that's in there as well. So it's really interesting. And I think one of the things that bothered me when I first saw the movie, and I understood that it was a Western motif, but it really bothered me that we didn't see more of the Slayers. I loved the Mark Boone Jr. character.
Yeah.
He's funny and sarcastic, and he doesn't look like a superhero. He's just this heavy-set guy with an upside-down cross shirt and stuff, but he believes in God. So it's like this whole really interesting thing about some of those guys. Some of them are completely throwaway. But I was like going, this is kind of cool. I'd love to see them in action more, because it was a lot of fun to see them. But I understood that you need to take away all the power so that the story becomes much more personal when Jack Crow has to go out there and do this stuff. Once again, horror movie universe. For him to be able to do all these things, there needs to be all this stuff that the world is absolutely wrong and crooked for him to be able to get away with it.
Right. It's interesting too. The way they keep going, because he's obsessed with finding the master, and I loved the whole thing where the master's not there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I love kind of the Tomb of the Living Dead tribute.
Oh,
where they're coming out of the ground.
Yeah.
I thought that was so friggin' cool. These master vampires come out of the ground at sunset, and they're just in shallow graves around that house. So he missed them because they were informed that he was going to be there. And that was interesting. It's also interesting that he does this slow motion during one of the most visceral moments, which is the massacre at the motel, the Sun God Motel. Everything's slow motion. He's kind of doing that Peckinpah thing of, people getting shot in the ballet of death, they used to call it.
Right.
And so there's that whole thing. And that works for some people. Like, it works for me because I know Peckinpah's stuff. But for a younger generation, when I was looking up reviews of this, they were like going, man, it's portents of things to come. How the pacing kind of lags as the movie goes on, that in the most vital moment where it can be the most kinetic, instead of going the way of like Cameron, where everything's happening all at once, he instead has everything happen all at once in slow motion, so that you're slowly watching all of this happen.
Right.
And so my version of film language, which is a little bit older, granted, that made sense. But for someone younger, they were like going, that's a very weird change. It's a very strange place to put that. And once again, that's sometimes the language of film, context is everything. And if that's no longer relevant, that can become a hindrance. Why did Peckinpah do that? Well, Peckinpah did that because all the Westerns used to be a guy gets shot and he goes, and falls over. But when he was in the army, he watched a guy get dragged by his testicles by the people that were his compadres. He was at a prison as a guard, and the Mexican, the Spanish-American kind of conflict was going on, and he watched these guys torturing people, and he saw people die, in battle. And he's like, that's not what gun battle looks like. So his thing was, he's going to slow it down. He's not only going to have chunks of blood coming off of people, he's going to show it in slow motion and have people slowly going down on the ground. And that's what made The Wild Bunch so amazing, was that in a world where you had Joel McCrea and a white hat, and John Wayne in a white hat. At most, you'd see a red spot, and the guy would be okay, but he'd still be able to walk. And Peckinpah was demystifying that. Now, we've gone 60 years since then, or 50 years since then. Is that still a relevant way to go if nobody else is doing it, right? So, it's a question, but it kind of broke my heart that the younger generation looked at it and looked at the slow motion going, man, how senile is this guy? he slowed down the action. This movie needs action.
That's funny. You mentioned the scene where the masters come out of the graves, and that also reminded me of Sugar Hill.
Yes.
That's
fucking cool. Yeah. Sugar Hill's awesome. Oh,
I love that movie, Mike. Yeah. Sugar Hill's it's a blaxploitation film from the 70s. It's a zombie flick, but it's the old school zombies. It's the voodoo type zombies.
Yeah,
and it's about this chick whose husband is killed by mobsters, and she needs to take revenge on him, and ends up getting involved in voodoo, and it's really good.
Yeah, there's some really good scary moments in that, and visually really interesting. It's kind of like Blackula.
Yeah,
Blackula has some really interesting stuff, but there's also a really scary slow motion moment,
I was thinking that when
you
you were mentioning it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, that was like embedded in my nightmare. That's the horror. That and like Jean Rollins' Fascination, where the woman's coming with the scythe, slash the guy.
Yep.
And it's like, that's more like me being just paralyzed going, oh, well, I guess I'm fucking dead. Here we go. It's going to happen in slow motion. Wonderful. Thank you. But yeah, I love that, the visual flair. I love a lot of the visual flair that's in the movie. One of my favorite shots is when it's in the finale, where there's like the 30 goons, but there's also downstairs. So just like a perfectly good Western, just like Assault on Precinct 13, just like Rio Bravo, we have an invasion of a police station, basically.
Right.
We have a jailhouse. And this is a jailhouse that has multiple floors. There's like a elevator in it. There's like a mine shaft kind of thing. And the bad guys are the ones that are inside, as opposed to Rio Bravo and everything, where the good guys are surrounded. We have our good guys infiltrating, and there's this wonderful moment where they have to do all this weird shit to get downstairs, and it's where they have to get this elevator down. And there's this complicated shit of how they're going to drag a guy up, and the winches work. It's too much to talk about here.
Right.
But anyway, it's all just to make the suspense unbearable, as this priest who doesn't know what the fuck he's doing, but he's the shaved ass bait at this point.
Yeah.
He's there to be bait for this vampire. And my favorite shot is they get down there, and Carpenter just holds with this priest stepping a little bit out of the elevator shaft. And then it turns point of view, and there's somebody walking, and there's just enough light to see a silhouette, and then it goes total darkness, and then there's just a little light to see silhouette. And it's a vampire, and it walks, and it goes and kind of hunkers down a little bit. And it doesn't run immediately. There's just this standoff moment. And you're like, what the fuck? And then it goes, boom, as fast as possible into the darkness. And it's like, oh, that's so great. And you see him coming, and he's like, hurry, let's go up now. Now would be a great time. That kind of thing. And it's just so cool. It's one of those things that there are certain shots in the movie that I go, there's vintage Carpenter. And vintage Carpenter is like that moment where the dark light, and the character gets hidden in a certain moment. He always has this wonderful overhead lighting that obscures in shadows, and people's eyes are kind of darkened because of it. It's always like a brown and a red. There's this really cool stuff that Carpenter does, minimalist in some ways and very open frame. And so there's not a lot of, there are a couple scenes where he really uses that frame very well. But it is one of those movies where I didn't feel that he really punched across the line like he usually does when he uses anamorphic. He uses that big, wide screen to really have action in different areas, to have you look in different areas. And in this, I don't know if he just didn't have time or what, but there's cool compositions, but he's not playing inside of the frame very often. And the times that he did is like, I'm going, there's Carpenter right there. There's Carpenter.
Yeah, exactly. So let's wrap this up. We've been at it for quite some time here. Scott,
I'm sorry if this was not the show you thought it was going to be.
Is
I
not,
had
not what
to
I
be
thought
honest.
it would be when I woke up this morning.
Yeah.
But, no, I'm kidding. It's been awesome. It's been wicked fun and fascinating.
I'm glad, because I have to be honest.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
And I still will watch this movie, but I have to look at it in different eyes.
It's funny now. I'm gonna go watch it because I didn't watch the right one, and now I'm like, after hearing your perspective on it, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna keep that in my head when I'm looking at it and see.
Hey, and perhaps this will be the best thing that ever happened for John Carpenter's Vampires. Whoever is listening is like, I want to tell that dickhead that he's completely wrong. I'm going to watch this movie.
There you go. Yeah, right.
I'm the best friend.
So I usually I ask people, would you recommend this movie? But Scott, I'd probably say you wouldn't. Am I putting words in your mouth?
I would recommend with reservations.
Okay.
I would have to talk with somebody about that. And before, I was just like going, and the funny thing is, this woman, I was at a Women in Horror Film Festival, right? I was a judge there. And so we were talking about how horror can show the plight of people who are marginalized. I was like, oh, well, you got to watch John Carpenter's Vampires. This is a great one about that, because I had this whole thing of them being the Indians and all of this stuff. And my memory, because I hadn't watched it in a while, was that all of that stuff about kicking her down the road and everything played just fine, as long as you're looking at it as a tough as nails, hard boiled thing. But it really sticks out once you have somebody go, hey, you told me to watch this movie, dude, and I've got to tell you how it made me feel. And it was like, oh, okay. So this isn't an organization telling me how they feel. This is a person telling me how they feel. And so with that, as long as I get to tell that kind of thing and say, listen, this is rough, and I have to tell you, it doesn't age well. And you can look online and find many people who talk about it, how it doesn't age well, but they hate it now. Right. I still see a lot of value in it. I like John Carpenter, but I have to say, even for me, it has not aged very well.
Yeah, it's one of those things that you just can't. Like I don't usually like look for or notice. Like you said, you just don't even notice it, or you think, okay, well, it's because this is a good guy, this is the bad guy. But every once in a while, there's something in a show or a movie that like my mind goes back to High Plains Drifter. When he comes back into the town and and the way he gets his anger out on the woman is he just grabs her and drags her into the barn and to rape her, basically. And of course they make it seem like she's not protesting that much because he's good looking and whatever. They kind of gloss over it, but that always made me uncomfortable in the movie. Like, okay, he's pissed at everybody and she kind of got him killed, but at the same time, is that like, what is he doing? This is the good guy, and he's
that's really interesting that you say that, because that's something that I noticed when I was writing my book. I was talking about a whole bunch of different things, and one of the things that I said is that there was this time in the 70s where every movie had it was an action film or a Western, had a rape, and there was always the Anne introducing, and it was a woman you've never heard of, and she was probably going to take off her top at a certain point. But it was really interesting, like High Plains Drifter, or not High Plains, you said. One of my favorites is Outlaw Josie Wales.
Oh, yeah.
But there is this strange rape that happens for no fucking good reason.
Yeah.
It's really unnecessary. And there are a lot of movies where rape and sex get kind of twisted together. And now, as time has passed, that was titillation. And so I talk about that now about horror, where horror has very rarely been about sex and violence. I call it sex and violence, but I call it nudity and violence. A lot of these movies, it's missionary position at best. And in everything else about horror, we're always pushing the extremes, right? We're trying to make you uncomfortable. But we are so scared of sex, and we're at a point now with all the crazy shit that's being talked about with the gender fluidity and things like that. It's like a perfect place to freak people out and piss people off by doing a horror movie that kind of plays with that. But we don't touch it. Instead, we had this weird time where we used rape as a tool for titillation, just to get somebody naked. And it wasn't a great justification for what was going on. So I hear you when you say that. It was something that was also, it came to my mind by watching a few movies. And I'm like going, man, this is so strange. And it dies. That ends in the 80s. and it really ends after like The Accused of Jodie Foster.
Oh,
Because
yeah,
at
yeah,
that
yeah.
point, you have this thing where, well, that's a rain on the parade, to say in a certain way. But, that kind of changed things, I think. And
That's
I think
an excellent movie, but that it's really hard to watch.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
I
I
can
mean there
never
are
watch
some
it either.
movies. There are some movies that are one watchers, right? And it's like the idea of me saying vampires I will recommend with caveats. There are several movies that are like that. Cannibal Holocaust is a movie that I'll say you should see once because of its significance.
Right.
Once.
Yeah.
But also you need to know what's in there.
Right.
And it's so important or so explosive. They actually have a no animal killing cut that you can watch, I think, on DVD, so that you don't have to feel that horrible feeling that the actors had. They come out later and say it was fucking horrible, but there we are. And so, movies like that, or Martyrs, or Irreversible, these are movies that I will recommend because they really got a rise out of me. It disturbed me, which is kind of what I go to this stuff for at times. But I need to let you know. I can't tell you to go watch Serbian film. That's one I can't recommend, right? I can't tell you to go watch Serbian film.
Isn't
with
Gary
a straight
Busey
face.
in that?
The new cut might be the Busey cut of Serbian film. Yeah, he's now put in everything. They're now just calling it a Busey. Yeah, but yeah. So I don't want to. And that's what I talked about before. I don't want it to be one-sided. It is not an or statement. I am not my way or the highway on this. I own it. I own that I like this movie, and I own that it is not aged well, and I own that you are not wrong if you see these things and it bothers you. That's just how it is.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I remember enjoying this film. I really didn't notice any of this stuff until you pointed it out, really, and I've had this film since it first came out on DVD.
Exactly, same here. Sony, I have the Sony version.
Yeah.
I haven't gotten the Blu-ray yet, but it might happen.
Right. That being said, though, I think James Woods is awesome in this movie. I think he's a fascinating character. I'd love to see more. There's two great moments with him in this. One is where he's with the priest character towards the end, and they realize they have to split up to make things work. And he looks at him and he goes, "Padre," and the priest goes, "I know." And he walks away, and James Woods is like, "Okay, good." You can tell he's thinking to himself, "I didn't have to emote or anything. That's good." And then the other moment is there's a moment with him and Montoya, and I really liked that too. They kind of have this brotherly understanding.
Yeah.
So I think overall, even though he's this hard-ass character, I think it's a fascinating character that it's too bad they didn't explore him further to find out exactly what makes him tick and why is he the way he is.
Well, I think that's certainly an interesting piece about him is that they do want to show that he is damaged. And how do you show that you're damaged? That you have friends begrudgingly just holding on. They see something.
Yeah.
They know him from way back when. Montoya knows him probably before things went south in such a way that this job has turned him into whatever he is. But there's also the thing of like that also would be great if you flesh that out on everybody else too. If you really want to complicate things,
right?
Show a little bit more of Montoya. Show a little bit more of that team. I would have liked to have seen that as well.
Yeah.
Humanize him, sure, but if you're going to humanize him, it would be great to also have everybody else that's there not just be fodder, grist for the mill, grist for the gore mill. If you're going to go down that path.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think, like I said, that character is fascinating. There are many wonderful, fascinating characters. I mean, I like certain movies where the killer is like really horrible, right? And it's not, they don't even have to be charismatic like Hannibal Lecter. It's
right.
a really disturbing character to say the least, but they can just be fascinating and like, that's someone I've never seen on screen before. That's a character I've never seen. Those are real people. There are people like that out there. Shit, that's crazy. And that to me is some of the exciting things that you can do with film. And I don't see why you can't do that in horror. And horror, last thing I'll say on this is I say this all the time. I'm not here to apologize for the movie that offends you. I will not hide that it can be offensive. I'm not going to pretend that it's not offensive.
Right.
But I am not here to apologize for it. Horror has a specific purpose. It is not here to share half its sandwich with you. The thing that it's here to do is to put you through that journey, that dark forest. You come to the dark forest to get to the other side and have that hero's journey. That's what horror does. Horror is here to get that fucking visceral thing out of you. It is a healthy handshake and dance with the shadow that everybody has in us. Every one of us has a Jack Crow in us, but we do it in a safe handshake with the film. And then we make the decision afterwards.
Right.
So that's my soapbox.
Right. Awesome.
Cool.
So Scott,
Put that at the front so they don't kill me.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Right.
Well, I'll put a disclaimer on the film, on the show. So Scott,
My regular fans are going to hate this guy. You've heard him before. You loved him before. You're going to hate him this time. I don't know what happened.
he just shit on your favorite movie. No, I'm kidding.
And one of my favorites, right?
Yeah.
I own it.
On his own favorite movie.
Yeah. Gun in the mouth.
So Scott, can you tell the listeners where to find you online?
Sure. If you want to hear more from me, or you're really in pain, you just need to feel a little bit worse about yourself. I have a podcast called Hellbent for Horror. It's a podcast about everything related to the horror movie and how horror is an art form as well as a social commentary. I talk about how horror informs our culture and how the culture informs horror. And I have a book called Screaming for Pleasure, How Horror Makes You Happy and Healthy. I basically talk about that shadow and how that shadow is so important for us to indulge every so often. You can find all that information at hellbentforhorror.com. You can find my Twitter and my Facebook and all of those things in that spot, but not my home address.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for joining me, and I look forward to having you on the show again, maybe with something less politically charged.
I think it's more socially charged. That's a bone of contention that I have. We call things political. They're really social problems, because social problems you have to try and solve. You have to look at those. They affect everybody. But if we call it political, then it's just a difference of fucking opinion.
Right, right. That's true.
Get me out of here. Hello, gasoline.
Okay, folks. Well, thank you for joining us for that really interesting episode today on our special 2022 13 Days of Hallowtober series, where we focus on modern zombie films. You can send your feedback to thenisnow42@gmail.com. You can also join in the conversation at our Facebook Then Is Now podcast group. What?
You said zombies.
Oops. I cut and pasted from last year.
So I was like...
And I tailored it towards what we just talked about, and I'm going to reuse it, so I'm not going to say what I just said.
Okay.
Okay, folks, thanks. Geez, I wonder now if I said zombies in my other shows, too. That's all right. I can use this one. Okay, folks, as I said at the top of the episode, we had a bit of a snafu because Michael was not familiar with John Carpenter's vampires, and he accidentally watched one of the sequels. But he did sit through the discussion that I had with Scott Bradley and chimed in once in a while. Now, of course, as I mentioned, Scott had strong, controversial opinions about the movie. So after our recording, Michael went and watched it for himself and had a counterpoint of view to Scott's. So Michael came back to record his counterpoint to Scott's opinion, and he's here with me right now. Welcome back, Michael.
Hey, how you doing, Roger? Thanks for the opportunity to do this.
Awesome. Glad to have you. Okay, we could use some controversy in this show.
I guess so, yeah.
Okay, so Scott and I really dissected the film. So why don't you, and the people obviously just listen to it, so why don't you give us your counterpoints to what he had to say?
Yeah, okay. Okay, so yeah, the first time around, I wasn't super familiar with the movie, so I just went on and looked up, did like a search on my Fire Stick on the TV and John Carpenter's Vampires, and the first thing that popped up that looked like it had that title, I watched it, and it turned out to be the sequel. And then I didn't realize that until we got into the conversation, and then I was like, oh, crap. So, yes, I finally did go watch the actual movie after the original thing. Scott was talking a lot about how he felt that it's my interpretation of what he said was that Jack Crow is the main character in this movie, played by James Woods.
Yep.
And the guy, and he just fucking hates vampires. His parents got killed by a vampire when he was a kid, and he has this history of them. He just sees them as vermin. They're just this nasty, disgusting, inhuman, lower life form. They're just vermin to him. And so anyway, he has this awful attitude toward them whenever he encounters them anywhere. Jack does. And when we were doing our discussion, it seemed like Scott seemed to be saying that there's a scene in the beginning where they're in Mexico or near the border or something, and Jack and his crew go into this house where they think there's a nest of vampires, and they go in and they kill a whole bunch of them and drag them out. And the whole time, Jack is saying things like, let's get rid of this vermin, and let's these like low life scum suckers, and Scott seemed to be saying that there was there was a subtext of like white supremacy and like what is it that they call white people these days? Colonizers.
Oh, I don't know. Yeah.
And like that there was like the hatred in that scene was more, Scott was interpreting it as it was like a white guy hating on like people from another country or people of color, as they say these days.
And they would dress like conquistadors.
What?
Or they were supposedly his team was supposedly dressed like conquistadors.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't even notice that.
Right.
Oh, that's what Scott was saying.
Yes, yeah.
You're saying what Scott said.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, he had some like I don't know, concept of like white people coming in to an area where there are people, that are not white, and treating them like they are dirt and scum and hating on them simply because they're different and wanting to wipe them out. And I was like, okay, because I hadn't seen the movie, I was frustrated because I didn't know how to respond to that. But first of all, now that I've seen the movie, no, Jack's hatred and disgust with vampires, that's his universal attitude toward these things. And you see it throughout the movie. Anytime when he gets an opportunity to kill a vampire, he goes like a little bit overboard each time. He gets really, full of rage and hatred and disgust, and he's just like, die, you piece of shit. And it's like, right. That's how he feels about vampires. And yeah, these guys were, Mexican or whatever, because that's where the scene took place. And the team was a mixture of like people from different races, and there was like, men and women mixed in there. It wasn't like a bunch of white men coming into. So I didn't see it that way at all. And I don't really like it when people try to apply, especially coming in after the fact. Like, this movie's been out for ages, coming in like much later and saying, oh, well, this is what that really meant, or this is what, even though he was showing like vampire hunters killing vampires, well, really what he was trying to say with this scene was that, it was white people expressing their disgust toward Mexicans or whatever, or people that are foreigners or whatever. I was just like, what are you talking about, man? Like, that's not, why are you, you're analyzing. I mean, I realize sometimes you have to analyze a film by stepping back from what's in the reality of in the world of the movie, and then talk about it from, like what people call meta, right? Like, step back from it, talk about it, or what the filmmakers were trying to do or whatever. I get that. But he said that he watched this movie like a million times, like every year. It was one of his favorite horror movies for years and years and years. And then, and I say he, I mean Scott. And then this year, I didn't really catch it. I think he said he went to some event that was about
a film festival, and he had recommended it to a woman.
Yeah, and then he said he was talking. He watched part of it, or he was talking to somebody about it, that he had recommended the movie to them, and they were like, I don't know how many women, but it was more than one. We're talking about like, you know, the subtext and the misogynistic this and that, and they had like they were looking at it through a very feminist lens, and primarily because not only in addition to the whole like contempt for foreigners thing, that's one, you know, racist angle that they talked about, but also the feminism thing where there was a woman, really gorgeous woman who gives a great performance in the movie. What is her name? The blonde chick in the movie?
Cheryl Lee.
Cheryl Lee. She's fantastic.
Yeah, she was Laura Palmer on Twin Peaks.
Oh, that's right. That's why I knew the name. I couldn't put it together. Okay.
I just wanted to correct you on one quick thing, because Scott did bring this up. There were no women on James Woods' team. There was just the men. There was the only women we saw were the prostitutes that the cop got for them.
Oh.
So that is one valid point that he had.
Okay. I don't know why I thought there was at least one like really tough looking woman, but maybe, yeah, I guess I got that wrong. Okay. All right. So, well, I mean, not for nothing, but if I was putting together a team of hunters to go into dangerous situations all the time and fight with vampires who are already stronger than humans, I don't know that I would necessarily pick a bunch of women for my team. I mean, sorry, women, but men are just stronger in a lot of ways, and, you know, as a general rule. And
well, so, I mean, you would add Sarah Connor to your team.
Yeah, sure. I mean, she's ripped and trained, and, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, your opinion it's been voiced quite a bit by other people in terms of the fact that vampires shouldn't be portrayed as suave guys in capes and bow ties. They should be portrayed as vermin. That's a very popular opinion of how vampires should be considered. Is that they're monsters. They're not humans. They, you know, like Twilight, it just so romanticizes that you forget that these people are indeed bloodsuckers.
Mm. And actually, I prefer vampires when they're nasty and monstrous, and that's one of the things I loved about this movie. After the previous podcast, I went and watched it, and I was like, this is awesome, because the lead vampire guy there, like, you know, after the scene where the team raids the house and they kill all the vampires and drag them out into the sunlight and burn the place down, and then I guess they hint to the fact, or he was hiding somewhere near there, I guess, the what's it, Valak or whatever his name is?
Yeah, Valak.
And so when they're all like relaxing and recovering, the team at the motel with like beer and hookers and whatever, and just trying to like unwind after this hunt, he shows up at night at the motel and just fucking rips everybody to pieces, you know?
Yeah.
And he's so feral and he's so monstrous, and there was none of this like charismatic, you know, charming kind of vampire. He was just practically almost like a werewolf. He was all teeth and claws and strength, and just, you know, killed everybody, wiped everybody out. Well, not everybody, but almost everybody. And I was like clapping. I was like, that's the kind of vampire that I can enjoy, you know, like that. I think I complained about or mentioned something about that in one of our other things, podcasts. But and then, you know, as the movie goes on, he's pretty much just this evil, nasty thing who's like, you know, just evil and destructive and monstrous and disgusting and nasty, and, you know, he's not charming. And like all the vampires, they just attack, you know, they want to rip you to pieces, and they will unless you kill them first. And so I liked that aspect of it a lot. And yeah, throughout the whole movie, Jack's contempt for them, like, okay, so going back to the hookers, right? There were hookers. Cheryl Lee plays one of them.
Yep.
So they bring in these call girls. They're all saying hi to the team and drinking beer and all this other horse shit. And then Jack goes outside to smoke a cigarette or I don't know what. And she comes out and says hi to him and kind of, you know, oh, do you want to like spend some time together? You know, I'm here. And he likes her because she's hot. And then he tells her to go to his room so he can do something before he gets back there. But the Valak is comes into the room and bites her, and so then she's like, in the process of changing into a vampire after that, and then all shit hits the fan, and then Jack and one of his other guys are like, okay, let's get the hell out of here, because everybody else has been killed. And as they're leaving, Jack sort of at first kind of goes to her like, oh, you should come with us, and then he notices that she got bit and how she's like kind of like stumbling around, and he sees the blood on her, and he immediately like pulls his hand away and almost like shakes it off like you would if you accidentally put your hand in piss or something,
Right.
Like he's just immediately like, oh God, ugh. He's like, what did you get bit? Like he's like, ugh. His attitude immediately changes from like wanting to protect this cute human to, oh, you're one of those things now,
Right.
And so then, yeah, there's a part that Scott also commented on when I forget what the story is. They drive away and the car breaks down or something, and then he and his other team member and the woman have to walk for a certain distance to get someplace. And they're walking on the street, and she's still sort of woozy because she's like, she got bit, and some of her blood got taken, and she's kind of out of it. And they're walking, and yeah, it's daylight, and they're on the side of the road, and Jack kind of shoves her at one point, and because she's woozy, she loses her balance and kind of falls onto her hands and knees for a second, and then stands herself back up. And Scott was saying like, oh, that's such misogyny that he's out in the broad daylight like bullying a woman and blah blah blah. And I was like, yeah, but what are you talking about? Like, why are you looking at it like from this societal lens? Because it's a story, and this guy is disgusted by her now that she's turned, or she's in the process of turning into one of these vermin things. And they bring her with them because she had a psychic
connection to Valak.
Right. There's a psychic connection. Yeah. So they know that they can maybe use her to locate Valak or vice versa, or for him to find them so they can kill him. So that's why they don't kill her right away. They keep her with them.
Right.
But yeah, I didn't think it wasn't about like a man beating up on a woman in broad daylight and nobody says anything. Like, first of all, they're in the middle of nowhere. They're out in the middle of a desert road. So who's gonna come up to them and say, hey, you should be nice to that woman? There's nobody there. And at that moment, he wasn't seeing her as a human woman. He was seeing her as this scum, this disgusting, vile thing that's not human anymore. Like, and he liked her initially, and he wanted to have sex with her, and she was great, and he was looking forward to that. And now she's what is it called? Compromised. She's like tainted goods.
Right.
So
because she's turning into a monster. Yeah. Right. And he tolerates her presence because they might be, it might be useful for them. But at the same time, he's still that contempt, just like it's ingrained in him. He can't be compassionate toward her because now that he knows she got bit, he's like, oh, well, that's it. No, right away. He's like, you're not who you were, 15 minutes ago. You're not what you were 15 minutes ago. You now have crossed a line into something that I hate and think is disgusting. And so, and it was such a brief scene. The way Scott talked about it, I thought it was this big extended scene of him kicking the crap out of her, but it was this really short scene of them just walking along the side of the road for 30 seconds or 40 seconds. And then, yeah, of course he's sort of mean to her because he considers her to be scum and monster and whatever at that point. And I couldn't understand why Scott kept insisting that it almost sounded like he was saying that scene shouldn't have been in there, or that, they shouldn't have had the character do that because it's a man pushing a woman and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, but if you take it in the context of the story and you know who the characters are and what happened and why they feel that, why Jack feels that way, I mean, then it's not about what it looks like from the outside. It's about what's going on in the story. It's the story, Right. Right. So, yeah. It just occurred to me, I don't understand why, since they were in the desert, why didn't they take her to Caleb's father's house and from near dark and have him give her a blood transfusion? Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So overall, what did you think of James Woods' performance in this? Oh, that was great.
He's got this way of like, if you just saw him standing around, you might think, oh, this guy's almost looks like a little nerdy. But when he's in the movies as like a cop, or in this case, is this vampire hunter, this like rage comes. He's very good at tapping into this rage and this like snippy, impatient, like, yeah, just kind of angry, not stupidly angry all the time. I mean, he can think and everything, but he's this, even though he doesn't look particularly intimidating at a glance, he's so infused with like this get the bad guy or kill the vampire or whatever, and he becomes like intimidating. And yeah, it's really obvious through the whole movie the way he behaves toward every single vampire or every single person he thinks might have gotten bit. You see his eyes change, his body language changes. He just immediately, this shade, like the shadow falls over him, and he all of a sudden he's like, okay, now I'm a different person around you because you might be one of them, and he takes such glee and satisfaction in killing them and destroying them. And there's like many times in the movie where he's like that, like there's that bit where one of the vampires is being dragged by the cable, and Jack is like on top of them with a pistol. He's like shooting them in the face repeatedly with the pistol and screaming at the same time. and then they get dragged out into the sunlight, and the other guy throws him the stake, and he jams the stake into the thing, and it catches on fire, and he doesn't even care about his own safety for a few seconds, that he's like on top of this burning vampire,
right?
And he's just like, God, you piece of shit, you fucking suck, die, God, he's just like, even at the end when Valak is finally on his way out, James Woods, he's like, die, his contempt is just palpable through the whole movie. So yes, that's why he doesn't care what form you're in, if you're a child, if you're an adult, if you're male, if you're female, if you're fat, skinny, black, white, he doesn't care. If you got bit, that's it. We destroy you.
Right.
And that's
that's the crux of what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I get trailed off and said, but yeah, that's why he behaved that way. That it's not. And then Scott was trying to psychoanalyze John Carpenter as a director, and like, oh, why he put that in there, and I'm like, I don't give a shit, really. If a director's trying to send political messages through a vampire movie, then that's on him, because I'm paying attention to the story. So.
Right.
But
right.
I don't even believe that. I've seen tons of John Carpenter movies, and I don't think he does that shit on purpose.
Yeah. I think I said as much in the interview, and I will reiterate the fact that I did say that I completely disagreed with Scott about how, these are white men killing indigenous people, because they're not indigenous. They're vampires. They're monsters. Scott did say that he felt maybe Carpenter should have made them look more like monsters, like Sherilyn Fenn. She should have had something. I'm sorry, Cheryl Lee. I kept calling her Sherilyn Fenn. So I can see that viewpoint as well. I think, perhaps to someone just glancing at the movie, they might see it the way he presented it. Had she had fangs or pointed ears or red eyes or whatever, that might change the person on the outside looking in. But again, you can't judge a movie by 30 seconds of footage.
Right.
You have to sit and watch it and understand the context of when it was released, what was acceptable back then. Like fucking James Woods is smoking like a chimney through the whole thing.
Yeah.
You can hardly show that anymore these days.
Right. I kind of feel like there was this, I mean, I guess in all vampire movies, there's a little bit of like kind of doubt here and there. Like, is this person, because sometimes vampires do look a lot like actual humans. And I think James Woods just generally distrusted everybody, like Jack Crow. His default position was to not trust people. And, I think because in his mind, he was like, there's always a chance that there might, they might have a bite on them somewhere that I can't see, or like, he just wasn't very warm and open to anybody. So,
right.
I don't know why I started talking about that in particular.
Well, and I just wanted to point out too that I think I said this as well in the interview, folks. We recorded this like 3 weeks ago or something, so some of it's a little fuzzy. I haven't edited it yet. It's actually the next one on my list. But I put this in with one of James Woods' top performances. I'd say in the top 5. I think it's equal to his performance in The Hard Way with Michael J. Fox, except that was more of a comedic role, but he was a similar kind of character in that.
Yeah. He was almost like a parody of himself in that movie.
Right. Right.
Such a great movie.
Yeah.
You think I'm stupid? No, I was hoping you were stupid, but no, I don't think you're stupid. There's some great lines. I was trying to sort of meet him halfway and kind of understand where he was coming from. I was trying to relate to what he was. Oh, I had another thing I was going to say too. So I mentioned the whole thing about High Plains Drifter and the rape and everything in that movie, and I was like, okay, that like in that case I can see. Okay, they didn't really show the rape, but they sort of made it seem like he was doing it for revenge, but she liked it. And I think in some cases there's that weird line between like, I don't know, like some women, they want the guy to be more aggressive and other women, they don't want that. And there's this question, there's always seems to be this question about like, is she hating this or is she liking it? And I don't know. I think I guess there's some movies where there are moments that seem a little questionable, but I don't think this one is one of them, Vampires. And Scott said that he's one of his favorite movies and he's watched it, every Halloween, every year for the last like 20 years or something. He always has it on in the background.
Yeah.
And so I asked him, well, wait, you've seen this movie so many times and you love it. And I said, when did you start noticing this kind of stuff about the racism and the misogyny or whatever? And he said, oh, just this last time, this most recent time. And I was so blown, like my mind was blown by that. I'm like, you've loved this movie your whole life, and now you're sort of like turning your back on it because a couple of people told you they didn't like, that they suggested that there might be some of these ideas, like they're interpreting it through this lens where there's misogyny and racism. And because you talked to them, you now have a critical eye on this movie that you've loved your whole life. And it's just like, just whatever, man. Like, I don't get that.
Right.
Like applying these moral standards and totally like wrecking your enjoyment of something that you have loved for a long time. I don't get that.
Yeah. And that can go both ways. I've watched movies that I've hated and then watched them 20 years later and loved them. But it's not like I watched the movie I hated every year. Once a year,
Yeah. No, right. And I've done that too, but that's more about like your ability to appreciate things in the movie that you didn't notice before or whatever, instead of.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think his opinion was, like you said, it was informed by a feminist who saw things in it that offended her.
Yeah.
And maybe didn't judge the film on its entire merit or when the movie came out.
Yeah.
So that's the good thing about us, everybody being able to talk about movies is you can interpret it however you want, and everyone can have their own opinion on it. And, it is what it is. You either just, if you don't like it, don't watch it again,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, well, Mike Hill, thank you so much for coming on to give your counterpoint. I felt kind of bad when you couldn't actually participate when we were first talking about it.
I really wish I had been prepared the first time around, because that would have been an interesting conversation.
Right, yeah. I'm almost kind of glad that we're doing it this way, because it could have been a knockdown drag out between the two of you.
It might have gotten ugly.
I would have just gotten up and gone take a dump or something and then let you guys fight it out.
Yeah, I was so close to being like, what the fuck are you talking about, man?
James Woods has so many great lines in this movie. Mahogany, ebony, Major Chubby.
Yeah. And then the priest says it back to him later on.
Yeah.
When he's not expecting it.
Oh, my God. Awesome. Well, thanks a lot, Mike Hill. And obviously you're on some of our other 13 Days of Hallowtober episodes that'll be popping up. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, folks, that's all the time we have for today's episode. Thank you for joining us for our special 2022 13 Days of Hallowtober event in which we're discussing vampire films this year. I just want to briefly remind you that we've got a live streaming monthly series called The Fright Lounge, in which we discuss all horror media for seasoned horror fans, as well as those of you who don't know if you want to get into horror. We've also got a new podcast called The Cult Movie Lounge, in which award-winning blogger Robert Manell and I discuss all cult movies all the time. And here's, of course, our sister show, The East Meets the West, in which we discuss Shaw Brothers films and spaghetti western movies, all of which can be found at our website, Haven Podcasts, that's plural, havenpodcasts.com. And while you're at our website, be sure to click on our Patreon link and TeePublic link to help support the show. We've also got a YouTube page, so please go to youtube.com/user/UncleDeath1 and subscribe to it. And don't forget to hit that little bell so you get notifications when we put out new episodes. And of course, we want your feedback, so please email us at thenisnow42@gmail.com. And you can also join in the conversation at our Facebook Then Is Now podcast group as well. Then Is Now podcast is part of the Dorkening Podcast Network, so please check out the other great shows there at thedorkeningpodcastnetwork.com. That's right, folks, and all of those links, like I said, they're on our website as well as in our show notes of every episode, and we are on all the podcasting apps. So if you like our show, please go to wherever you download your podcast from and leave us a great review, because that bumps us up the list in the algorithm and helps more people to find us. Thank you for joining us today. Class dismissed.
The This Now podcast is intended for entertainment, educational, and informational purposes only. Sounds, music, and clips played during this podcast are the property of their copyright holders. All original content is copyright Jupiter Media.
For more shows like the one you just heard, check out the Dorkening Podcast Network at thedorkening.com.